Welcome to our series Myers-Briggs for Midlife Career Changers. I'm David from editbits.com, and I'm the producer for the series. Our expert is Edythe Richards, Myers-Briggs Master Practitioner, and today we'll be discussing the INFJ type. We'll begin with an overview of this type, delve into the cognitive functions, which are the middle two letters of one's Myers-Briggs type, discuss INFJ strengths and weaknesses, and finally, talk about career paths that other INFJs have found satisfying, as well as what types of work environments INFJs excel in. Let me welcome Edythe first, and have her say a few words about INFJs. Edythe.
Thanks, David, and a special thanks to all our INFJ listeners. Many INFJs have told me they feel differently than other types of people, and as a result, they end up questioning their own paths in life and their own values, perhaps even their own sanity. My goal today is to validate some of these issues that are central to many INFJs and to provide insight that can help INFJs on their career journeys.
I'm sure our INFJ listeners will appreciate this information, Edythe. Now, would it be fair to say that INFJs are the rarest of the 16 personality types?
Yes, INFJs are estimated to be between 1 and 2% of the U.S. population. Because they're so rare, other types may have difficulty relating to the INFJ, and INFJs themselves may probably have felt misunderstood during at least a few parts of their lives. Many likely have also felt lonely and as a result may have isolated themselves and or been depressed because they feel or felt so different. At the same time, they do want to be of service and help others and do meaningful work, so they struggle with this desire but also struggle to protect themselves at the same time.
That sounds very complicated. So let's start our conversation by defining what INFJ actually stands for. What do you say, Edythe? How about an overview?
Sure, and great point, David. This is a complicated type, so I'll do my best to stay on track. INFJs stand for introverted. They're inwardly, not outwardly focused, directing their energy towards themselves and their own ideas or thoughts, and need time to mull things over before sharing them with the external world. Intuitive. They're attuned to the future possibilities before they focus on the facts and the here and now. They tend to be abstract and imaginative. Feeling. They base decisions first on their own personal values, how they feel about the issue, and how others are likely to feel about it before focusing on the objective principles. And judging. They prefer a planned, organized lifestyle, and they tend to be decisive and in control.
I'm immediately thinking that these people are visionaries and would likely excel in a role where they are creating or changing systems. These also aren't people who would do well in repetitive, mindless work. Rather, they would need to find meaning in whatever they do.
Great points you brought up here, David. You're really getting a knack for these Myers-Briggs concepts. And you're right, INFJs are creative, visionary people who have original ways of looking at the world, and they're innovative in solving problems. They're very much valued, therefore, for their insight and their foresight, and they use their own inner vision to find meaning and new possibilities all around them. They're also very caring people, capable of great empathy, and they're most comfortable sharing their supportive nature and insights once they've gotten to know the person. INFJs have an internal picture of how they want their work to contribute to the greater good, so they're great motivators to everyone on their teams. Younger INFJs often have trouble sitting back and letting others do their jobs because they want everything to be perfect. This quest for perfection can lead to burnout, and INFJs are also known as being overly sensitive, and they can feel victimized if the world doesn't seem to value their insights. Many INFJs also express difficulty in social gatherings, especially large gatherings with strangers. In fact, these situations can be a terrible source of social anxiety for an INFJ. Shallow, meaningless conversations tend to exhaust them, and they'll probably go to great lengths to avoid these, but they'll also feel guilty doing so.
Now, this isn't my type, but I have to say I can relate to this. Noisy and chaotic environments cause me a lot of stress, and it sounds like they do for an INFJ as well. I'm also picturing overbearing or aggressive individuals in a networking or social situation, and how this would be very stressful for an INFJ. Have you heard this from INFJs, Edythe?
I have, and I think our INFJ listeners can relate to what you're saying. INFJs tend to have a different tolerance level for noise than other types do. Many INFJs I know have even said they don't like to watch TV because they can't hear themselves think. At the same time, they do recognize that they need sensory activities such as sports, food, or art, and they may overindulge in these areas.
Speaking of sensory activities, let's talk about the cognitive functions for INFJs. For our listeners, cognitive functions refer to the middle two letters of one's Myers-Briggs personality type. In this case, we're talking about N, intuitive, and F for feeling.
That's right, David. Let's talk about the dominant function first, which is introverted intuition. This is an information gathering process that focuses on searching for meaning, significance, and underlying commonalities in what we see. This function may manifest as thinking by ways of images rather than words, and in the forms of symbols, images, dreams, or patterns, operating unpredictably at times through flashes of insight. It can result in a fine-tuned awareness of people's authenticity level and how safe it is to be open and honest with them, and also as a vision to guide in strategic planning.
This makes a lot of sense to me. As an INTJ, if I remember correctly, this is also my dominant function.
You have a very good memory, David, and you're spot on. I'm sure you can also relate to feeling misunderstood when using this function, as it's often difficult to explain to people who don't use it, especially people who use this as a dominant function. They may be seen by the rest of the world as way out there or weird, and they may be socially awkward as a result. This function may also appear arrogant to onlookers, as people who use this function often have little regard for authority and end up deciding for themselves whether or not the rules make sense and should be followed.
Yes, this can come over as arrogance, and it always surprises me when I hear this from others, as I don't mean to be that way, but I do mean to be true to myself. And I can see how that can be seen as arrogant by the rest of the world.
It's interesting that you say that, because arrogance certainly isn't restricted to one type. Any of the Myers-Briggs types can come across as arrogant for different reasons and is seen by different people. In the INFJ's case, much like with the INTJ, people may perceive these types as arrogant because they're in their heads so much of the time, and they may forget to communicate with others. Extroverted types in particular may wrongly assume that an INFJ's quietness is disinterest, when that's probably far from the truth.
I see. This actually reminds me of another podcast you recorded, Edythe. It was called Ways Introverts Can Communicate with Extroverts. Check that one out by going to www.atopcareer.com and look under the MBTI question corner. You'll find that on the top menu, just underneath the logo. So, moving on, how about the auxiliary or secondary function for INFJs?
The auxiliary or secondary function is the second most preferred function and the second one to develop. For INFJs, the auxiliary function is extroverted feeling, which is attuned to examining and improving interpersonal feelings and morale and managing relationships in a nurturing way, making sure others are comfortable, giving positive feedback, things like that. Thus, INFJs work hard to cultivate good feelings and harmony in their environments, and they do this by reading emotional expressions and body language, and then by doing or saying things that have a deliberate positive impact on others. This is why this function is often referred to as the people pleaser function. People who use this function tend to demonstrate a responsibility for caring for others in a collective group rather than individually, and therefore they may be crusaders for social causes. Individually, they may only have a desire to rush in and help if they have an established connection with the other person.
This makes me wonder if, because INFJs have a preference for introversion, yet are devoting a great deal of their feeling energy towards the external world of trying to understand people, do they have more difficulty understanding themselves?
Well, I've heard more than one INFJ say that they have a more difficult time deciphering their own emotions than those of others. Because of their dominant introverted intuition, INFJs tend to have very deep impressions of people, and they can often see through their hidden motives and intentions. This is why many INFJs believe they can understand people better than those people can understand themselves.
Does this mean that they may present themselves differently to strangers than they do with close friends or family?
It could. In large groups, INFJs may seem to always be cheerful as part of their attempts to promote harmony and good feelings to the group. They can also be really funny and engaging people and great storytellers too. However, their extroverted feeling often takes on a different persona to INFJ's close confidence, and they may be more negative with these folks. Some INFJs even feel like tortured souls, and therefore they can be seen as moody, pessimistic, and very intense when they use too much of their extroverted feeling. And this is really much to their own chagrin, because INFJs typically don't like to be around pessimistic people.
That makes sense. Now, Edythe, how do introverted intuition and extroverted sensing work together for INFJs in career development?
As we've suggested, INFJs commonly experience a conflict in values between their dominant introverted intuition and auxiliary extroverted feeling. An example of this, an INFJ woman I know was asked to lead a project at work on a subject she really didn't believe in, and this put her in the difficult position of making a choice between her own values or maintaining harmony with her team at work. Like many INFJs, this woman had trouble saying no, so she agreed to oversee the project. But privately, she told me how much she regretted doing that.
I know you've mentioned this before, Edythe, but this is a great example of why we need to rely most on our dominant function. In the case of the INFJ, introverted intuition. Now, this would be because it's the most reliable function, and essentially it's the basis for navigating life. So, it's no wonder that when they're not using this function, but instead using the extroverted feeling function of trying to please others, that this INFJ woman you mentioned felt so distressed.
That's absolutely right. When it comes to making an important decision, INFJs would do well to listen primarily to their own inner voice and rely on their guts. It's very easy for INFJs to get sucked into that extroverted feeling world where so many demands are placed on them by other people, and this can really grind away at the INFJ's soul.
Wow, that's really interesting. Edythe, let's talk about some of the strengths of INFJs.
The first is one we've already discussed, and that's their originality and creativity. INFJs are fascinated by original ways of looking at the world, and they're inspired by innovation and the chance to solve problems in creative ways. They're not only great at using their creativity in themselves, but encouraging it in others. INFJs are therefore great at leading others towards positive change. We often see them creating and maintaining a harmonious team spirit, as well as listening to the concerns of others and helping them to see alternatives. Their ability to see the holistic in chaotic situations enables them to be efficient program or project managers, especially when the projects they're working on are for the greater good. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, INFJs tend to be people of great integrity, bound by their convictions and committed to their ideas and visions, even in the face of resistance from others.
INFJs sound like people who truly value cooperation among others and use affirmation to motivate and win loyalty too. I bet they're able to form close, lasting relationships as a result. But like everyone, I'm sure they have their weaknesses too. Edythe, let's talk about some areas for improvement.
Each type has the potential to overuse their preferences, and as we've said before, too much of a good thing isn't a good thing. Sometimes this happens when a person's under stress. So one way INFJs may lose out is by getting caught up in their dominant function of introverted intuition, becoming blinded by their idealism and ignoring reality when it contradicts their views. Because they can be stubborn and persistent about their visions, they may stay in careers or relationships, for example, when the facts dictate they should move on. A strategy to help their perhaps fruitless quest for the ideal is to learn to relax and be more open to present realities. Some INFJs can lose out when they take things too personally or are too sensitive, and this can happen when they focus too much on pleasing others, as we've mentioned, or if they're reluctant to intrude on others. When this happens, INFJs may find that they themselves are the ones who are overlooked and underestimated, which makes the INFJ susceptible to self-pity and brings on a victim mentality, bemoaning that life isn't fair. Similarly, they may hold anger or criticisms inside too long, leading to some pretty intense anger, raising their voices and yelling, or becoming defensive and sarcastic, unable to control their rage. They may even become physically ill or develop psychosomatic illnesses or withdraw from others. Therefore, expressing themselves through their auxiliary extroverted feeling is critical to their well-being. Though expressing themselves in the moment may not provide immediate solutions, they'll feel better once they've expressed themselves, either through words or through tears. This is especially important for those close to the INFJ to keep in mind. They may not even be looking to have their problems solved right then and there, but they'll greatly value emotional support and reassurance. This is really a lifelong struggle for many INFJs, trying to balance their own needs and desires with those of others.
Do you think they have a tendency to be critical of others as a result of this, even if it's unintended?
Well, they do need to watch their tendencies to be judgmental of others and focus only on their own goals. Once they've made up their minds, they may have trouble seeing alternative viewpoints, working on being flexible about plans or arrangements, and admitting when their own unique plans are unworkable are areas many INFJs can work on. A couple other strategies for INFJs is to do your best to remain calm with people who are being bullying or demanding, but do let them know in a professional manner if they're being disrespectful. Though many INFJs don't see verbal fluency as a strength, it's important for them to express themselves when their deeply held values have been violated. In all fairness, some people may not realize that they're coming across as bullying or domineering. And because INFJs tend to not like surprises, taking the time to plan out what they're going to say can also be helpful. Finally, I recommend resisting the urge to focus on one hurtful comment or minor detail, as this can cause INFJs undue stress. Work on learning which details and routines are important and which ones aren't.
This is turning into a really comprehensive discussion, Edythe. Now, I imagine that when INFJs are on track, they have a great balance of using their visionary strengths to help others find creative outlets to better themselves as a whole.
Yes, and this brings us to workplace needs of INFJ types.
Excellent. This is what I'm sure many of our INFJ listeners have been waiting for. So let's start with what INFJs need in a career or a workplace.
So Myers-Briggs types with both N and F in their middle two letters will thrive much more in academia or in careers that are of a helping nature rather than in the corporate world that is focused solely on profits and without meaning. This is especially true for INFJs who, as a rule, need to be devoted to what they do and to incorporate their values into their careers, working with other highly dedicated and engaged people. They'll be drawn towards careers where they'll have an impact on people, especially the bigger picture and future needs of people, where they can help contribute to others' conceptual, emotional, or spiritual awareness.
This makes sense. It sounds like INFJs place a tremendous value on authenticity and justice. Are there environments where INFJs would be more successful, Edythe?
INFJs will work best in collaborative situations where there's little or no competition among coworkers. They're creative people who are devoted to the causes they believe in. They'll thrive when their values and needs are encouraged in a caring and supportive environment where they're encouraged to learn and develop new skills. As we've discussed, INFJs are great at creating new programs or services that address challenging problems and help others, especially if they're doing it on a collective rather than an individual basis. They do need plenty of time to prepare and produce their work, and they'll work best when they're able to organize their own time and retain control and responsibility for their projects.
This may be a good point to mention a potential hurdle for some INFJs, which I'm guessing may be political correctness. I imagine these are people who might actually resent having to abide by organizational politics. Edythe, is that fair to say?
You're absolutely on point, David. While many other types might also take issue with office politics, it may be especially surprising to the INFJ that they have to navigate political waters, so to speak. They're much better when they're in environments where they're able to talk openly and express freely and not play games. Along with that, many INFJs will be stressed by a lack of control or a lack of autonomy at work, by arbitrary decisions, or working with people who have an "it's good enough" attitude, or, as we've already discussed, overbearing individuals. In these situations, the stressors that we described can manifest, causing the INFJ ultimately to be unhappy and therefore unproductive.
Now, that's something INFJs certainly want to avoid. So, with that, let's get into specific career paths for INFJs. And let's remind our listeners that as you're going through these careers, if you don't see yours on the list, don't panic. There are successful people of all Myers-Briggs types in all career fields. These just happen to be the ones most often selected by INFJs, along with some reasons why. Edythe.
Thanks for the reminder, David. The Myers-Briggs is also only one piece of the pie when considering a potential career path. With that said, the paths most often selected by INFJs fall into 5 general categories: counseling and teaching, religion, the arts, social services, and business.
Great. Let's start with counseling and teaching first.
Specific careers in this area include career counselor, psychologist, teacher in high school or college social sciences, languages, or the arts, educational consultant, and librarian. Because INFJs so value learning and personal growth, as well as connecting with others one-on-one, they're quite comfortable in academic and counseling environments. These careers also allow the INFJ to use their own knowledge and to help others improve their lives.
And next?
Next is religion. Careers here include priest, clergy, nun, religious worker, and director of religious education. This type of work requires a deep personal commitment to a particular philosophy and value system, which is why it's appealing to so many INFJs. It also gives them the opportunity to share their vision with others.
And the third category?
Third is the arts. Artist, playwright, novelist, poet, and designer are careers in this category. The draw of the arts is the ability to create unique products that allow the INFJ to express themselves in a personal way, resulting in a positive impact on others. This type of work is also often done independently, allowing the INFJ a sense of control over the process and the final product.
And next?
Next is social services. These include healthcare administrator, director of a social services agency, mediator or conflict resolver, social scientist, social worker, and mental health counselor. Helping others within an organizational structure is quite appealing to INFJs, especially if they're part of a close-knit staff. Many of these positions also allow new approaches to problems that will ultimately benefit individuals and society, and this gives the INFJ plenty of opportunities to connect with clients one-on-one.
And the last category?
The last category is business. Potential careers include human resources manager, marketer of ideas and/or services, organizational development consultant, and employee assistance program coordinator or counselor. Although INFJs tend not to be drawn towards the business world as a whole, HR, organizational development, and consulting are often quite satisfying because they're the people parts of the corporate world. This allows the INFJ to work in a helping capacity and to affect change in other people's lives using their creative problem-solving skills as part of a supportive team.
This is a great list, Edythe. I'm sure our INFJ listeners will find this useful, especially those who are considering a career change, or even our younger INFJs who are still in school or are uncertain of what college program of study to choose. Now, is there anything else you can think of that INFJs should keep in mind if they're thinking of a career change?
I'd like to remind our listeners that you won't have the same career or life journey as other INFJs. You're also a unique individual with unique attributes. We've discussed career paths that you as an INFJ may find satisfying, along with reasons why. The information in this podcast is based on my own knowledge of and experience using the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and I'd also like to cite some additional sources that can be helpful for further reading. Type Talk by Otto Kroger, Life Types by Jean Kumaro and Sandra Hirsch, and Do What You Are by Paul Teager and Barbara Barron-Teager.
Thanks for sharing your expertise, Edythe. Edythe's website, again, is www.atopcareer.com. Please do check it out for more Myers-Briggs podcasts, articles, and information. I'm David, producer of the series Myers-Briggs for Midlife Career Changers. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and of course our website, where you can sign up for our newsletter at www.atopcareer.com. Feel free to share this file with your friends. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.